Good evening, Tansei, and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. The Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs selected a new Grand Chief today in Winnipeg. Cathy Merrick is the first woman to take the top spot. Merrick, the former chief of Pimicikamak Cree Nation, or Cross Lake, beat out 6 other candidates. George Kemp, former chief of the Barons River First Nation, lost to Merrick on the second ballot, 37 votes to 22. Merrick was chief of her community for 5 years and the councillor for 12. She takes over from acting Grand Chief Cornell McLean after Arlen Dumas was removed in August due to harassment and sexual assault allegations.
I thank you, each and every one of you, for believing in me to be your next Grand Chief. We're all making history today. You should be all proud that I'm the first woman chief for the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs.
And at the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, we caught up with the former acting Grand Chief Cornell McLean about the comments he made yesterday regarding Cindy Blackstock and the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal decision. Late last year, the Trudeau government announced a $20 billion compensation package to First Nations children and families shortchanged by a chronically underfunded child welfare system. But yesterday, the CHRT said it's not enough, and the current agreement does not guarantee all victims will receive $40,000 in compensation and reduces this amount for others. McLean said yesterday, quote, "In Cindy Blackstock's eyes, no child matters," end quote. We asked him today if he regretted saying that. Here's what he had to say.
You know, I guess the thing is that what's her motivation behind it? You know, is she looking for more of a bigger or better compensation deal for the First Nation kids? Because, you know, I think right now the kids have been waiting, you know, the young adults and families have been waiting, you know, for the last year since this agreement, you know, has been worked on, and it's been announced, and that, you know, they want to get their hands on some kind of dollars.
And we will have more on this developing story tomorrow. Ottawa has a new police chief, but already concerns have risen about the new chief's background and the process that was used to hire him. APTN's Fraser Needham has more.
Eric Stubbs is Ottawa's new police chief, and you may have heard that name before. In his most recent role, Stubbs was in charge of core criminal operations for the BC RCMP, which means he oversaw the police raids on the Wet'suwet'en territory in recent years. University of Ottawa professor Veldon Coburn says this hiring is a major step back for police relations with Indigenous people.
It leaves a bit of sour taste in the mouth of probably a lot of people that are committed to Indigenous issues, particularly because of his role, either directly or even indirectly, with the you know, the extra constitutional arrest of not just journalists that were covering the BC RCMP's infringement of Indigenous rights out there, but just the violence that's been visited upon Indigenous folks in Wet'suwet'en and also in Fairy Creek.
Sam Hirsch is with the community organization Horizon Ottawa, and he agrees the appointment is troubling.
You Google Eric Stubbs' name, and right away you find things about arresting journalists during Wet'suwet'en, or supporting that or defending that. You know, I can't speak directly to those actions, but only what I've read in official documents and the news. But I mean, it's not very promising for you know, the safety of marginalized groups, equity-seeking groups in our community. I'm worried about that, as many people are.
The way Stubbs was hired has also raised concerns. The Police Services Board announced his appointment 3 days before Ottawa's municipal election on Monday. A newly elected Somerset Ward Councillor Ariel Troster says this is not the way it should have been done.
And it comes at a time when so many citizens felt like they were failed by the police force. You know, failure to protect us, especially in our downtown communities, when our city was taken over by extremists. So it's definitely a difficult time when it comes to policing in Ottawa, and extra transparency, extra accountability can never hurt. So I would have really hoped that they would have waited to make that announcement.
Both Hirsch and Troster say what Stubbs needs to do now is to reach out to Indigenous and other marginalized groups in the city in an effort to show he is willing to work with them. But Coburn says he remains skeptical whether the new police chief can bridge the gap.
Matters of rule of law when it comes to Indigenous peoples, they really have a really damaged history with the RCMP. I mean, it was established out of the Northwestern Mounted Police, which was a militia basically to remove Indigenous peoples from the land. And the new Ottawa chief of police here participated in one of the more, I guess, contemporary versions of that with the violent removal of Wet'suwet'en and other Indigenous peoples from their territory.
Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
The review on how the Cannabis Act affects First Nations continues in Ottawa. This week, the Senate Committee on Aboriginal Peoples heard from a sergeant of the Six Nations Police Service and a First Nations lawyer. Here's Annette Francis with more.
Rob Monteforti was the first witness. He's a detective with the Drug Enforcement Unit for the Six Nations Police. He told the committee that although the elected chief and council have implemented their own cannabis regulations, there are currently 30 of what he considers illicit cannabis shops in the community. He said it's tough to enforce the law with limited manpower and not enough funding.
We're only a 3-person drug unit on Six Nations, and the bulk of our time goes towards fentanyl trafficking. So we rarely have any time to deal with any of the Cannabis Act stuff. If we do get information that a dispensary may be dealing other illicit substances, we will look into that and enforce that. But as of right now, due to our manpower, and like I said, the issue with fentanyl.
Recognition of First Nation jurisdiction is also a battle. According to lawyer Sarah Mainville, the federal and provincial governments missed a chance to work with First Nations to create a legal framework. She said asserting jurisdiction is an expensive and time-consuming process. For example, the Mohawks of the Bay Quinte spent 16 months consulting their members and creating their own law that ended up going nowhere.
It was very, very difficult, very, very expensive, and unfortunately a missed opportunity because now there isn't an enforceable law in that community, and there are at least 3 dozen gray market cannabis stores in that community, and I don't think it is telling tales out of school to say that some of them are fueled by organized crime.
Mainville says amending the Cannabis Act to include First Nations jurisdiction would slow down the black market. The Senate's Aboriginal Peoples Committee wraps up their Cannabis Act discussions tomorrow evening. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Catholic priest Johannes Rivoire will not be extradited to Canada to stand trial for alleged sex crimes against Inuit youth. Rivoire was charged in February with 1 count of indecent assault on a child from his time as a priest in Nunavut in the 1970s. Previous charges had been stayed in 2017 due to a low chance of prosecution. The Public Prosecution Service of Canada put out a statement today saying the French government has given them 2 reasons why they won't deport Rivoire to stand trial in Nunavut. The first, France doesn't extradite criminals and hasn't for a century. The second, under French law, too much time has passed between the alleged assault and now. Last month, Inuit land claim officials traveled to France to meet Rivoire and to urge the government to return him to Canada to face a courtroom. All right, we have to take a short break, but stay with us. More news when we come back. Welcome back. What should a government include in their draft action plan to address missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls? That's the question the Northwest Territories has been asking over the last few years. Our reporter Charlotte Moore-Jacobs looks at one group leading the conversation ahead of an important final draft action report.
This men's sharing circle is the latest tactic to address missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in the Northwest Territories.
Just breaking down that stigma that they have about, a men's healing group. Because, there are a bunch out there that cater towards, mental illness and addictions. Ours is a little more about finding autonomy and being advocates for missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls.
In its fourth session, the weekly meetings are funded by Native Women's Association. Cody Erasmus, a co-creator and facilitator, has also attended other discussion spaces dedicated to tackling the root causes of violence and brainstorming solutions.
Even though I was a counselor in that moment, I was also sharing my own experiences. So it was nice to be able to hear other people share. And then I was learning from them because they're all Indigenous men. And I really related to a lot of their shares and how residential school affected intergenerationally, like all of Indigenous people.
Since June of 2021, the territorial government has been hosting community engagements with sharing circles, Indigenous governments, and stakeholders. They've been collecting input on GNWT programs and services and asking which actions should be included in the NWT's various MMIWG reports and overall draft action plan.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to November 3rd when, the day after we've tabled our finalized action plan and we can begin to start working on it. Whereas some of the departments have already started working on some of the actions that are proposed. But it would be nice to get the work started on this.
Director of Gender Equity Division, Sabet Biscay, has been working on the GNWT's response to the 231 federal calls for justice, and on November 2nd, the Territory's draft action report will officially include 95 calls to action.
It means everybody has a role to play in making sure the violence that's directed at Indigenous women and girls and to us LGBTQ people is stopped. We don't want people to be hurt. I have, family members who have had experienced violence, and this is something that's not right.
The report includes 36 actions to respond to calls for justice on culture and language, 21 actions surrounding human security, 19 actions related to the justice system, and 17 actions centered around health and wellness. Some of the biggest changes center around territorial-run programs and services.
Is how we are providing our programs and services done from a perspective of compassion. Are we trying to take everything into consideration? People with lived experience, somebody who has been beaten up so many times, are made to feel worthless, have no value and things like that, they're going to have a really hard time trying to stand up for themselves.
Charlotte Moore-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
Boyle Street Community Services in Edmonton has helped homeless people for over 50 years. They recently presented a documentary that tells the stories from people who they have helped. APTN's Chris Stewart has more.
The Art Gallery of Alberta screened the documentary, Invisible Persons, Stories from Boyle Street. Boyle Street Community Services created it to give a voice to those who are not heard often. Project creator Dan Zimmerman says many people opened up to him on camera.
I'm privileged to work in the drop-in down at Boyle Street, and we had a bunch of folks that were there the day we were filming, and we just asked them, we were very clear what we were up to. And some folks were pretty private, but a lot of folks really jumped at the chance to share their wisdom and their stories.
And still have a smile 24/7, even though I get into an argument, somebody argues with me, somebody punches me, I turn around and look at them and I say, you know what, sis or bro, no matter what, I will always love you. Whatever anger you have, let's deal with it. in another way.
You hear this a lot on movies.
Zimmerman
right?
says he wants people to take away that everyone is a person and have their own unique stories.
We're featuring 4 folks tonight, and one of the folks, Adam, he's someone who moved here from Ontario, you know, is a welder by trade. Just fell into some difficult situations, but is such an eloquent speaker.
I think mostly what we need is kindness, right? We really need that. So I try to offer that. However, I can't. Sometimes it's not much. Sometimes it's just smiling. Sometimes that's all it is.
Once you're on the street, you're stuck on the street, and it's hard to break through. And if you're working, at least that way you got something to strive for, right?
Zimmerman says he hopes the public's perception of those people currently down on their luck changes.
I really am grateful that they were able to share their stories, because I think our inner city community sometimes is really marginalized, and we don't necessarily see them as citizens. We see them as problems.
Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
All right, time for one final break, but stick around. You're going to want to see the story about a mysterious creature in the Yukon. That's coming up. Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. Thanks to Dawn Marie for sending in this great shot of a sunset over Rice Lake in Alderville First Nation, located just east of Ontario. Looks absolutely stunning there. That's some beautiful land for sure. Thanks, Dawn Marie. Email your photos to share@aptn.ca and your photo might be selected to be featured as our next photo of the day. All right, now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting over in the east, 19 in showers in Charlottetown and 20 in showers in Halifax. 15 in Cartwright and 16 in Happy Valley Goose Bay. 5 degrees in Val-d'Or and 10 in Montreal. 11 degrees in Toronto and 7 in North Bay. 5 degrees in Big Trout Lake and 6 in Wawa. 2 degrees in Churchill, and 7 in Norway House. 8 degrees in Barons River, and 11 in Winnipeg. Clear and 7 in Estevan, and 13 in North Battleford. 11 degrees in Buffalo Narrows, and 5 in Stony Rapids. Moving west, 10 degrees in Fort Chippewa, and 8 in Peace River. 15 in Edmonton, and 7 in Calgary. 14 and some showers in Campbell River, and 7 in Bella Coola. 5 degrees in Dease Lake, and 7 in Smithers. Minus 11 in Beaver Creek, and minus 11 in Old Crow. Minus 5 in Norman Wells, and 3 in Trout Lake. Minus 11 in Fort McPherson, and minus 13 in Inuvik. Minus 14 in some snow in Cambridge Bay, and minus 1 in Whale Cove. Minus 19 in Resolute, and minus 6 in Iqaluit. It's big, it's hairy, and if you're lucky enough, you might just spot one in the Yukon. While no one has ever proven the existence of the mysterious creature, a Sasquatch investigator in Whitehorse has compiled a new book of sightings and encounters. Our reporter Sarah Connors has that story.
There we are. Hope he enjoys it.
He has been intrigued with Sasquatches since a little boy, so thank you.
And
the elusive Sasquatch has intrigued Red Grossinger for over 20 years, so much so that he's compiled a book about it. The retired Canadian Army officer's interest was sparked after spotting a tall two-legged creature while fishing on the Takini River in 1997.
It looked strange to me, so I mentioned that to one of my friends from the Teslin Tlingit Nation, and the lady mentioned quite clearly, well, that's a Sasquatch, a wild man. And this one depicts a Sasquatch sighting on the Magundi River.
Since then, Grossinger has investigated numerous Sasquatch sightings in the Yukon and northern BC. Many of those reports have been compiled into his new book on Nagani, the Dene word for Sasquatch. Grossinger says one of the most puzzling encounters took place in a Whitehorse neighborhood.
He became somewhat translucent, and gradually became transparent. He said at one time he could see the outline. We could see right through, see the bush behind.
That still gives me goosebumps when I think about this and talk about that story.
Another of those reports comes from Grant Pauls. The Tahltan Nation member claims he saw 2 Sasquatch near this area outside of Ross River, Yukon.
What kind of shook me is the sheer size of the width of the shoulders. Probably talking like 4 to 5 feet wide. And I didn't want to stick around and find out anymore, so I jumped in my truck and raced off.
Paul says he's sharing his story so people are aware.
I don't know if they would harm you or not, but it is very disturbing, so I thought that was important to just share.
And this one here, for example, that's the one that I mentioned downstairs at Harker and Crestview.
But unlike Paul's, Grossinger says most First Nations people in the territory have been reluctant to speak on the matter.
But they know a lot more than we do.
As for proving Sasquatch's existence, Grossinger says bones or a body could help solve the mystery. Until then, he'll leave it to his readers to decide if they believe in the legend of Nagani or not.
I'm not trying to convince anybody at all. I'm presenting what it is, and that's it. If you want to believe it, okay. If not, too bad.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
From refusing to pledge allegiance to the Crown to being the first Indigenous woman ever on a city council in Whitehorse, on APTN's In Focus, we hear from all levels of government as we put Indigenous politicians in focus. Here's a quick look into this week's episode.
I pledge allegiance to all my relations. The legislature here in Ontario, was never built for First Nations people like me. And I knew that coming in, that it was a colonial system.
I wanted to be able to inspire other people just the way that I had been inspired. And so, I think we don't really need more politicians. We need more people with lived expertise and empathy and people who are going to lift others up around them.
Parliament is a place that Indigenous people often have been neglected from, but that's changing. There's many of us now in Parliament from all parties, and any party that attempts to or restrict or even prohibit Indigenous voices is one that shouldn't belong in Canada, because most Canadians believe Indigenous people have a place here and deserve a voice here.
And it's no secret, every day in the House of Commons, my rights, the rights of Indigenous people across the country are up for debate. I think just taking up space, it's about folks like myself, making it easier, being trailblazers in that place so it's not so difficult for ones that follow after me. And I think just knowing that our voice matters, and to really understand, if we are not taking these seats, if we are not taking these places in the House of Commons, who is going to be taking these seats? And will that person who's taking that seat, will they really support Indigenous people and Indigenous rights?
All right, that's all we have for you on this Wednesday edition of APTN National News. For news anytime, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Daryl Stranger. Thank you for joining us. Miigwech, and have a great night.